is Writers Radio. I'm Ingrid Rose, and I'm introducing our first Writers Radio live event. Would She Know Me Now? A literary brunch was held at the beginning of May on the Sunshine Coast. We turned the recording into a Writers Radio program, The Child I Was, the Adult I Became. A literary conversation between our two authors, Liz Long, reading from her book Navigating Shitstorms, and Caitlin Hicks, reading from her novel A Theory of Expanded Love. Our inventive MC was Canadian artist Gord Halloran, known worldwide as the creator of Paintings Below Zero. And all this was shared with our live and lively audience in Gary Sill's studio. Liz Long's childhood was overshadowed by the disappearance of her aunt when that aunt was a young woman. And Caitlin Hicks' novel is based on her growing up in an Irish Catholic family of 13 children.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I know that most of you don't know us, so it's wonderful that you would take the chance and come along. I'm Carole Harmon. This is my husband, Gary Sill, and Ingrid Rose. We produce Writers Radio. The idea for today was to do a live thing, which is the first time we've ever done anything like that. We're going to record it. The idea is that we'll have readers by our wonderful readers, Caitlin Hicks and Liz Long, and Gord Halloran is going to be the moderator. What we hope to create is a reading and conversation around the subject matter of these two books. I think we're going to have a wonderful time. Great, so I'm going to turn it over to Gord.
We start with readings that I think will introduce the theme of this whole event. I think Liz is up first.
My name is Liz Long. After I got out of an inpatient treatment center in 2021, where I checked myself in for depression, I decided to become a mental health advocate and share my story. My book, Navigating Shitstorms, is called this because that's the world I was thrust into at the age of 6. In an attempt to make sense of my life for my readers and also for myself, I created a fictitious world that I call Victim Town. It has places like the Ego Arena, the Guilt and Shame Cafe, the Control Factory, the Resentment Parking Lot, the Anger Gas Station, the Sorrow Swampland, the Denial Trails. I actually have hiking boots that are literally threadbare. And lastly, Epiphany Hospital and the Meditation Meadow. I'm pretty sure that, just maybe, some of these places might sound a bit familiar to some of you. I have only 8 childhood memories. I'm going to read one of them from my book. Not long after my baby sister died, a girl disappeared from the woods right beside my school playground. It happened on the weekend, and she didn't go to my school, but she was the same age as me, and it happened in the same woods my friends and I played in every day at recess. While my brother and I were still at the dinner table, my parents were talking with each other about this new development, and they remembered something. They said that Marianne Schuett still hadn't been found. Who was that? Listening to them, I learned that just last year, 10-year-old Marianne Schuett had gotten into a car when her school let out. She was never seen again. Her school was only 9 miles away. What? It's not just my Aunt Linda and the girl in the woods? Another girl got taken last year too? It sounds hard to believe, but it's true. After this, my father started walking a group of us neighborhood kids the 3 blocks to school every morning with a pitchfork. It completely boggled my mind that we even owned such a thing. I guess it was the only tool in our shed that could be used for protection. The risk of getting snatched just became even more real. All the kids were scared, but nobody was more afraid of me than me because I knew firsthand that it didn't just happen to other people. Now, you'd think I'd remember something as ridiculous as my father holding a pitchfork while walking down the sidewalk, but I actually don't. That part was told to me by the other kids and also by my dad. What I do remember is being terrified. I was terrified to be alone every single time I left my house. Going to school was a non-negotiable. In my classroom, I started looking around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 36 kids here. That's a lot. If I can just stay really small and quiet and not do anything to stand out, then if the snatcher shows up here, hopefully he won't see me. It's not that I wanted anyone else to disappear. I really didn't, but that's how the voice in my head worked back then. My refusal to leave the safety net of the classroom, however, also meant that I wouldn't even go to the washroom. Not ever. Not even at lunch. Too embarrassed to ask the teacher if a friend could go with me. I didn't want the kids to know I was such a scaredy cat. I was ashamed. In 1968, it was a very long day until school let out at 3:45 in the afternoon. One winter day, when the last bell finally rang, I had to go to the bathroom really, really badly. And I don't know why, but nobody was ever around to walk us home. Instead, each of our parents gave us instructions. Whatever you do, stay together. Make sure you come straight home. Don't dilly-dally and don't talk to anyone. And lastly, pay attention. Keep your wits about you. That day, I debated about staying with the group like I was supposed to, but my bladder was about to burst and they all walked so slowly. We were just a group of kids. We didn't even have a spoon, let alone a pitchfork. The way I figured it, running by myself as fast as I could the whole way, well, that was my best option. I happened to be wearing a brand new outfit. Dark green polyester pants with a seam down the center of each leg to the coolest bell-bottom flare ever. My plaid top was a perfect match. I was styling. The voice in my head, however, was very concerned about something else. Oh my gosh, I have to go so bad. This is not good. Then a different voice showed up. It'll be okay. Just run. Run your fastest and don't look back. So I took off at lightning speed, holding on to the handle of my school bag for dear life. I raced down the sidewalk. I couldn't help but look over my shoulder every few steps, and after only 2 blocks, I could barely breathe. As I rounded the last corner, I could see my house. Yay! But it was still more than a block away. Afraid that I was not going to make it, I pretended I was on the track team with the coach on the sidelines yelling at me, "Run faster, Long!" And I did. Somehow I found even more energy and I was able to pick up the pace, but the extra effort expended for that gain in speed, well, let's just say it wasn't the best move. It began to compromise my ability to hold in the pee. It started with just a few drips. I could feel each one slowly rolling down the inside of my legs, separately chasing that fateful drop that led the way. I slowed down to a jog, hoping to get a grip, as they say, to stop the flow, but as any girl knows, once that dam breaks, it is damn hard to stop. The pee continued to roll, quickly becoming an unstoppable stream and gaining in velocity down both legs. Oh no, I hope it doesn't show. With my shitty luck, it was cold out, freezing cold. January in Canada cold. And I wished desperately for the safety and privacy of my home. The faster I ran, the more I peed. Ugh, my best school clothes are ruined. Didn't take long for the pee to soak right through the fabric of my green polyester pants, and what followed was like a freakish science experiment. As the warm pee met the frigid winter air, the result was disastrous. Gusts of urine-smelling steam began to rise up all around me. I must look like an idiot. Why couldn't I live in Florida? My run mutated into a weird, happy-go-lucky, straight leg swinging out the sides kind of movement because my fancy pants with a pleat down the middle, not only did they got brittle, they froze. As my wet skin rubbed and chafed against the frozen fabric, my legs began to feel like they were on fire, which made no sense at all. I glanced down. There were no flames, but my legs were burning. And to make matters worse, I have frozen tears on my face. I was very confused. Oh, I can't think about this right now. It turned out I didn't have to because I'd arrived. I'd made it. Back in my warm house standing there, I looked down at myself and I was melting. My pants were melting. But I didn't get snatched. Not this time, anyway.
Oh, man.
My name is Caitlin Hicks. The book is A Theory of Expanded Love. Annie Shea is the character we're talking about.
And how old is she?
She's 12. Thank you. July 13th. Dear Blessed Mother, somebody important from Washington went to Russia to talk about a treaty on nuclear bombs. He brought 3 tons of American equipment to set up the red telephone hotline between Washington and Moscow. I hope it works, because I have been losing sleep over the possibility of being turned ashes to ashes and dust to dust, if the Lord won't take you, the devil must, under a mushroom cloud while I'm dreaming. Good thing we're still saying our rosaries for the Russians, because you can't trust those commies. Clara's been gone for about a week, and we all miss her. But something fun and exciting is about to happen, and it's an absolute secret. Rosie is having a birthday party on the weekend, July 13th, and she doesn't know anything about it. Rosie is the smallest in her class of 7-year-olds, and somehow, looking at her short self amidst her lanky classmates, I realized that when Rosie was born, Daddy and Mother named her perfectly. Rosie, to me, seems like the name of someone you treasure and love. The best part about Rosie is her brown eyes. They're soft-looking like a deer. When she looks up at you quietly and patiently, you just wonder, what could she be thinking? Being that she's so small, has such big eyes, and goes around a little shell-shocked about everything, you can't help but feel sorry and affectionate towards her at the same time. She lives in the same mess and chaos we all do, but she gets lost in it. That could be it. Maybe there are just too many of us. Too much noise, too many saints who are perfect in the middle of too much dirty everything everywhere you go, and the whole scenario is a little bit overwhelming for Rosie. At home, she drifted like a lazy shadow on a hot afternoon, as if she was waiting for something to happen, which it usually did. Rubber band fights broke out regularly after school, with somebody crying at the end or being put down for a nap. Once, she went missing for a few hours, and I found her in the tool shed, standing next to the boxes in the dark, sucking her thumb. She had been playing hide and seek and was still hoping someone would find her. Every day after dinner, you had to light a fire under her butt. You had to say to her, Rosie, it's time to do your homework now. Maybe she was on the couch, recovering from the rosary and all the images of Christ being walloped by a whip on his bare back or having huge nails pounded into his hands. That kind of violence could be tough for a 7-year-old, especially if you have a good imagination. I'm not sure how I got through it myself. I was always cringing at the blood and torn flesh. But Rosie would sit there staring at nothing, holding her patch of blanket. All that was left of her babyhood was about 4 inches of unraveling, faded green-yellow plaid cloth. She held on to it wherever she went and didn't even try to hide it. Every day as we counted heads after packing into the Volkswagen on the way to school in the morning, on the list to check was Rosie's blankie. One of us would take it out of her hand and say something like, "We're just going to take your blankie and keep it safe here for you when you get home from school." The expression in her eyes as she looked back at all our faces surrounding her in the car every morning was pure terror. So I'm not sure, but maybe Mother noticed this about Rosie and thought a surprise party would bring her out of herself. I jumped at the chance to try making something for her birthday. Ever since we visited the artist in Glendale, I began seeing things like the shape of branches on the oak tree and how they looked like bony arms scratching the sky, or the shades of gray and brown on the bark of the eucalyptus tree. I couldn't wait to put something together out of some rocks and twigs and white paint from a watercolor set that I bought with my babysitting money. Every day after school, I went down to the bomb shelter. I got this feeling inside of me, a certain excitement. No one knew where I was. As I walked down the steps to the lower level, I could feel the coolness of the cement against the earth surrounding me. I always hid the ingredients in the bottom shelf of the cupboard, behind broken pots and old newspapers. I pretended I knew what I was doing, like the artist did. As Rosie's birthday got closer, I worked away at her present. Back at the bomb shelter, I found some curly sticks from the oak tree and green acorns, the kind with the hat, and I glued them to the top of a flat rock. By about Thursday, I had the idea to paint some white onto the rock and a few spots on the branches. When Rosie woke up that day, she stumbled out into the dining room table in her rumpled bunting, looking for presents, because that's how it's done at the Shea family home. A stack of presents first thing in the morning, and you know you really were born in this family, and somebody noticed. Cake at dinner with candles and the song. But there was only one present at Rosie's place that morning. Pea green pedal pushers and a yellow top with a daisy for show. She didn't even get filler presents like socks or underpants. Rosie didn't say anything about the lack of presents that birthday morning. Maybe she had faith that the one pedal pusher outfit was due to the bunny. She had to appreciate the fact that getting a bunny out of your very own in a family of 13 children was a truly unique and special event and didn't require presents of a more ordinary nature. I thought Rosie getting a bunny was so rare as to be practically unbelievable, but as it turned out, the bunny was part of the master plan. It was a decoy trip to get Rosie out of the house. While Daddy and Rosie were gone getting the bunny, all her friends came over in their party dresses with presents. We set the table, blew up balloons, got cake out of hiding. I had invited Wanda to sleep over that evening and help me with the party. This was the kind of thing we both loved to do. Mother, Madcap, and Jeannie made the cake and cleaned up the picnic table under the oak tree out back. Jeannie answered the doorbell and wrote out name tags. Wanda and I handed out party favors, yellow crepe cups with jelly beans, nuts, and Chex cereal. We made Jell-O the night before. The pigs in a blanket were puffing in the oven. Back at the bomb shelter, I kept looking at my creation before I finally had to cover it up with wrapping paper. I really appreciated the natural quality, how it looked like an oak tree with snow on it, clawing the sky. Rosie could put it on the ledge by her bed and see it whenever she wanted. Finally, I wrapped it in newspaper that I had painted myself to look like the pants of the artist, spray painted, splattered with every color of the rainbow. I counted the minutes until Rosie could open the present that I had made for her. Even Wanda didn't know what I had done. Everything went off without a hitch, as the cowboys in the westerns would say, until Jeannie ran back and said, "She's here! She's here! They're parking the car!" It was a moment of breath holding. We all ran to our seats at the table. Wanda and I sat shoulder to shoulder, and when we saw Rosie coming around the corner, holding this trembling white creature in a black cage, all the voices cried out at once, "Surprise!" Rosie's mouth dropped open, and then she burst into tears. I felt so sorry and happy for her at the same time. And I ran over and knelt down and hugged her. And then I looked back at what Rosie saw. A whole bunch of kids in pastel dresses and a huge stack of colorful presents on the picnic table. Balloons on strings bobbing over the presents. A big cake with 7-minute frosting and 7 candles in the middle of the table. Our bouncy dog yipping and barking while all of Rosie's classmates chattered like a flock of birds. It was like a painting. Everything your eyes looked at was sparkling and new. I couldn't wait until she ripped off the paint-splattered newspaper and discovered my own first artwork. Finally, dun, 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 Madcap handed her my present. It was an unusual shape, and Rosie just kind of stared at it. Just as the wrapping paper fell from her hands, a little smile began at the edges of her mouth. "What's that?" Jeannie asked. It's a sculpture," I said. I made it myself." Jeannie grabbed it from Rosie by the stick. In her hand, the stick dislodged from the rock and fell on the table, breaking into pieces. Rosie looked at me like she had been stung by a bee, but was so stunned by the surprise of it that it didn't occur to her to cry. I stopped breathing. "It's not a sculpture," Jeannie announced. "It's just a rock and sticks." I could feel my neck getting hot. I tried to swallow, but I finally had to gulp in some air. "You broke it!" I cried, my eyes stinging. It sounded so infantile and obvious, but I couldn't think of anything else to say. Rosie inched over to me from where she was standing. Her little palm slipped up into my hand. I looked down at her. She looked up at me. I whispered into her ear, "We'll fix it, Rosie. Don't worry."
Thank you so much, Caitlin and Liz. I imagine that both of you were observers when you were children, that you were taking in story every day of your lives and watching and listening and carefully putting these pieces together. I wondered if we might be able to start that particular idea.
I decided that I was going to write a book. I firstly did all the research about childhood trauma. And a couple of things that I learned about what you just prompted, that's the job of children, is to figure out how the world works. And all children have to come up with a meaning of anything that happens. And when something that's happened is scary or painful, they often don't have emotionally intelligent adults, even today, to help them navigate that and come up with a meaning that is healthy. So they're left with only their imaginations to come up with a meaning.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, so I guess I have to talk about the separation between myself and my character. I went down a path for sure when I was writing this book where I was looking at what happened in my childhood, and I was taking the stories down in a nonfiction kind of way. And then I just got tired of it and flipped over to the fiction side. As soon as we did that, it was just glorious. Looking back on my childhood, which inspired this book, I was kind of like the family clown. I would do almost anything to get attention and laughs. So I was an observer, to answer your question.
This is more of a personal kind of question, because we were talking about kinds of trauma that would happen in childhood that may last the rest of your life. My grandmother had my mother in her womb when my grandfather passed away from influenza. So I realized after a number of years that my mother had to have been in that womb absorbing whatever trauma my grandmother was feeling when she was forced to move forward with a pregnancy and not be able to grieve at the same time. And I've always thought it's an interesting way for me to see my own mother. So this is my question. The trauma, how far back does it go? And how important is it as you develop into adults?
Well, it's really interesting to me that my mother, she was in her early 30s when she got pregnant with me, but her mother died when I was in her womb. So that's telling that same story.
There's been lots of studies done about gestational trauma, and one of the biggest ones came after 9/11. There were a whole host of women that were in various stages of pregnancy who witnessed that traumatic event. And because it was on such a global scale and they were so easily identifiable and they all were subject to fairly similar experience, it was a really great study environment. The results were irrefutable that the child had experienced the same effects of trauma. And you ask how far back it goes. Well, it's actually generational. The other thing that came out of all my research that surprised me, actually, was that the thing that had the most bearing as to how we fared as an adult was not the severity of the trauma that we experienced as a child. It was how, as a child, we responded to it.
Can I add to that? I was in the middle of the pack, right? So there were people above me who got in trouble, and then there were people below me that I had to care for in a lot of ways. And this chapter shows her in the moment of her, like, oh my God, my beautiful artwork is being destroyed. And she has to put her feelings aside and care for that little person.
Thank you, Caitlin. I find it interesting that listening to that story again, the stifled creativity in the story strikes me personally as a very strong and emotional thing that comes from your childhood, is that your burst of creativity is smashed in the very beginning stage. But what's positive about it for me is that stifled when you were a child has been overcome, so that your life from then on as an adult has always been about creating things and doing that in a very positive and sharing way. Both of you have taken this path of finding creativity as a way of solving these issues for yourself. I thought it might be interesting now to try and get the audience involved in this situation. Liz, if you could just list the different venues that you have in your victim town. Just give us a list. Everybody listen carefully to the list and try to imagine where we might find you the most often. Which venue would you get lost in?
I talk a lot in my book about the voices in our head. The voice that talks back, I call it our heart voice. And our heart voice is the one that we were all born with. And it's the one that says things that are reassuring and hopeful and are motivated by love. Whereas the victim town voices are all manipulative and motivated in fear, and they make us feel like we're not enough. So the first place in victim town is the ego arena. And it doesn't have a single voice. The purpose of introducing the ego arena is for the readers to learn that we do have that dual voice in ourselves, and it talks about competition and comparison and judgment. And in the arena, it's all the voices from the other places that are amplified on the loudspeaker. The control factory is that the boss, I call her, it's a woman who runs the control factory. She says things like, you can't be happy unless something happens. You need to solve their problems. It's your responsibility to make them happy. You need to rescue people. The next place is the Guilt and Shame Cafe, where the maitre d' is the voice there. And the maitre d' says things like, you've dishonored your family. You're worthless. You deserve to be treated that way. It's the voice that just makes us feel really hopeless about any mistake we've made or failure we've had. The resentment parking lot is where the big grudge holders hold events, and it's where blaming happens. There's long-term stays. There's a high-rise parking lot. The denial trails, I know well. You can do whatever you want to do. Don't think about it. Alcohol is your best friend. You can do whatever you need to do to just do not think about it. There are gifts to all the places, and spending time there in Victim Town. It's where we learn our life lessons and transform and become better humans. But the problems arise when we get stuck there. The next place is the anger gas station, where there are multiple types of fuel, and the high octane additive fuel is hate. The Sorrow Swampland. On the outskirts of the Sorrow Swampland, there are worry rafts and rumination rafts. And like Huckleberry Finn, you can get on a raft and rent one for a while and typically hang out with other people that are wanting to do the same thing. In the middle of the swamp, at the very bottom, lives the monster. And in the swamp is where grief is. Almost lastly, there's Epiphany Hospital, where you get to evaluate the chances you have. There is a fast track out of Epiphany Hospital to the opposite of Victim Town, and it's a place that I've called Freedomville. But not everybody chooses those roads. A lot of people have a stay in Epiphany Hospital and then go back to Victim Town until they're ready to leave. And that's the thing. We can't drag people out. We can't rescue people. And everybody has to find their own path in their own time to leave Victim Town. I also included the Meditation Meadow in Victim Town because there is always that one place of reprieve, and we have our heart and our heart voice, even if we're stuck in Victim Town. And the other town voices are muffled, and it's a place where we can formulate a plan or enlist other people to support us if we need it.
Great. Thank you. I hope you all got that. And you can't all go to the Guilt and Shame Cafe. All right? Because I don't think there's enough room. Okay, so is there anyone who's ready to own up? Tell us what area they might be found in.
I don't identify with the hate part, but the anger gas station, where you can fill yourself up with some righteous indignation and kind of feel stern and angry at others.
Yeah, it's a way of processing the hard feelings or the triggers, right?
Or not processing.
Well, yes, not processing, reacting.
Reacting to. Yeah.
Reacting, thank you.
Yeah.
My recent processing of a memory from childhood where I was 3 and I was terrified. I was taken into a dark place and I could never figure out where it was. And this happened quite a long time ago. But that little 3-year-old girl was left. And she's still in the sunshine, not knowing something terrible was going to happen. And I recently, in processing grief, made contact with that little girl, and now she's inside me. And it is the most profound experience to finally embrace and hold that part of self. And when you talk about the squashing of self that happens in trauma, that was that experience. But it was so hard for me to even embrace that little girl because I was terrified of the black hole. I was still afraid, but I did it. And the freedom from that is that I now have that all of the things that you're born with in your heart are alive and well and always were. Feels like a freedom. Yeah.
That's great.
I appreciate it so much. your depiction of those aspects of trauma was brilliantly done.
Yeah, I would say about 35 years ago, I was definitely immersed in the victim denial place, and it took dealing with my childhood trauma. It actually took being in another country and facing a lot of crises and the way I was treated there to really force me to have to face my past, which I didn't want to willingly. But after spending a long time doing that through the healing process, and actually did inner child work consciously in therapy for a year, which made a huge difference. And dreams, my inner child came out in dreams. And it's just actually been an incredible experience going through that, coming out the other side. And now I feel like I'm in the heart space, and it's very gratifying to be able to use my healing process as a way to help and inspire other people, which I do with my students and clients. But it's that whole shadow and light, the two go together, and too often I think we're more conditioned to want to resist and push down the darkness and the shadow because it's too frightening. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to face it, but when you do and come out through the other side, it's really amazing.
Well, I think I spend most of my time in Meditation Meadow, if that's a place where we do self-compassion and self-care, if we're aware of, the traumas and the things that have hurt us in life. But we are, being soft with ourselves in order to get through it. In my past, and certainly in my childhood, the place I would bounce into when it was just too much, trying to be this perfect person and everything that, grandparents and parents wanted, was into the anger. And now I only go there very rarely, and I kind of recognize and soften it and come out of it more quickly than I used to. But I definitely can feel the power that's there. That is, sort of an addictive thing I've read, and then, but it's not a good power. It hurts others, right? So it's really important to, like Caitlin said, the love you felt for your little sister helped you find a coping mechanism to just even saying those words to her, it's going to be okay, we can fix it, and so to remember to focus on our love of others or love of yourself, that child that was innocent and didn't deserve these hurts, that's a real key.
I know you've got to put this.
No, my childhood was just one beautiful event after another. And it's only lately that I find myself in this, the parking lot, what is the resentment parking lot? Particularly since COVID started, and I find myself pressed to the perimeter. Most of my friends have abandoned me for being a contrarian. So I'm having to deal with resentment to these people. But I was wondering, just to sort of change the subject, I noticed both of these readings I thought were wonderful. Each of them had this base or this foundation of apprehension. There was the abduction and then the bomb, the threat of the bomb. And I was wondering how those events, they sort of held each reading together for me. Mm-hmm. That was like the ticking bomb under the seat, through the whole reading. But how do you think that those events in those lives would have affected a child's upbringing?
Well, I think that for me, that I remember those things. And I remember a conversation that I had with my dad when the Bay of Pigs thing happened. That was scary. Like when we were in school, we had to go underneath the tables, put our hands over our heads. And I kept thinking at the time, what good is this? This is a nuclear bomb we're talking about. Like, why am I going under my desk? And I was a child thinking this, and then I, just before, going to bed saying, oh, I'm so worried about the bomb tonight. It might fall tonight. And my dad said, oh, it's not going to happen. Don't worry. It's a long time before anyone's going to do that to change our way of life. So he was very smug and very, we were living in California. He's the whole, everything that goes with that, right? But that's what he said. But I was scared, and I think a lot of us were. But we just had to like stuff that and get under our desks.
I mean, I didn't have to deal with that, but hearing your story, it just brings to mind all the children, particularly in the United States, that are doing those drills. Yeah. That are doing those drills for the shootings and just the trauma that they're experiencing by practicing that response. I mean, their bodies, they couldn't not have that, the nervous system be completely freaking out.
I'd love to add a little comment to that, because I remember having the same internal response when we had to do the earthquake drills and get under the table. Mm-hmm. As a 6-year-old, I remember knowing that this is kind of ridiculous. If a massive earthquake like they talk about happens, this is not really going to keep us safe. Yeah. But I thought, well, it's the only thing that they can think of to kind of prepare us as much as they can. But it, I think, let me realize that our safety is kind of not in the hands of the people, the adults, the people around us, but something greater than that, something else. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was like, well, that's good enough. That's the best they can do. But I don't have to worry about it, because I had a sense of trust that, there was something greater that was going to take care of us. And this earthquake probably wasn't going to come anyway. So that's a choice.
My mother was terrified that the same thing that happened to her sister would happen to me. So I had a whole different set of rules growing up as a teenager. I wasn't allowed to walk anywhere after dark, which, in the winter in Canada is like 4:00, right? I wasn't allowed to go to anybody's house unless it was mom approved. Like, my rules were so stringent, and I was trained in self-defense, and I just had an uber sense of my personal safety. Everywhere I went, I knew where the exit was, where the payphone was. I had a pocket full of quarters at the time, always, so that, so I grew up paranoid, just a little bit, but I'm not now.
I'd like to find a way to get other members of the audience involved. So I have a question, or maybe it's a format for you. If you could imagine that you are now, everyone in the audience is 10 years old. It may take a bit of imagination. So you're going to be 10 years old, and you have the opportunity to ask one question of your older self. Okay? I didn't mean to stump everybody. I'm just trying to get. So, who can begin? 10 years old now.
My question would be, how can I feel safe in the world?
Okay. Maybe we just go down the line. Everybody just chime in.
For me, the question came really quickly before you even finished speaking. Okay. And it's, when can we do something that's important to me? And I don't know if that's, a wise question to ask my older self, but maybe it is, because that's what I so needed to know.
My question isn't a question. My question is, congratulations, you made it this far.
Good stuff.
Do we have to do this all over again?
Good job. Excellent. Okay, down the row.
The first thing that came into mind, because I have a combination of confidence and lack of confidence, would be, what's to lose?
Yeah. Good information to pass on.
Yeah, I'd have to say, well done. Here we go. That's been a real journey. It's been an adventure.
That's great.
I think my 10-year-old self would say, why not go for it?
Yeah.
Don't hold back. Just go.
Great.
Do you still imagine?
I think that I would be so different than what my 10-year-old self would imagine who I am. So I would say, how did we do it?
Yeah, I would say the same. I don't know if I can relate very much to my 10-year-old self, other than just I feel like the trauma came after that era that I experienced. So I would say, like, I don't know, I would just be more just like grateful for myself kind of being young and not knowing very much and then getting through it anyways. Yeah.
I immediately thought my 10-year-old self would say, do you still love writing and reading?
I would have asked, when will my mother die? Because that was the biggest terror I could imagine. But other than that, life was good, so I think I would ask, oh boy, what's next?
Well, I don't think I was ever allowed to be 10 years old. So I would ask myself if I was ever going to be allowed to act my age.
Beautiful. Right?
And now?
Now, I'm probably younger than I should be.
Are you sure you want to be a musician?
Why are people so much harder than nature?
My 10-year-old self, I might just say, do I really have to go to Mass?
My 10-year-old self it was year 4 of Linda still missing with no answers. And so my question would have been, is this nightmare ever going to end?
Good. I don't know if that's a segue to the end of the program.
What about your question?
Yeah, what about you, Gordy?
The question that's for me was usually about some kind of strange creative stuff that I was doing because I just could not stop building and making things. And that would be to please finish up what you start. Okay? So that's my advice to all creatives. Please finish up what you start. It's very gratifying to do so. Yes.
I wasn't clear about the question when I made my first answer, but for me, my 10-year-old self would have said, where can I be safe?
Good. Good question. I wish we had an answer for that exactly.
You create your own.
Yeah, create your own safety, I guess. Yeah. Well, this is a wonderful place to bring safety to everyone, I think. Good creative energy, great sharing, and a lot of really great friendships. So I think that might be a great place for us to kind of wind down and wrap it up, unless anybody else has got something really, maybe 12-year-old statement.
No, here's to Freedomville.
Freedomville.
That's my mantra.
Let's all go there together.
That's a good one. Thank you all for coming today, and we enjoyed this so much.
You've been listening to a writer's radio program, The Child I Was, The Adult I Became. A literary conversation between Liz Long, reading from her book, Navigating Shitstorms, and Caitlin Hicks, reading from her novel, A Theory of Expanded Love, emceed by Gord Halloran, and shared with a live audience in Gary Sill's studio at the beginning of May. I'm Ingrid Rose. My appreciation for my co-producers and co-hosts, Carole Harmon and Gary Sill. We're very grateful to Gary for his original music and technical skills that make Writers Radio possible.
You have been listening to Writers Radio, a non-commercial collaborative project which presents talented writers reading their own work. These stories, essays, and conversations revisit the long tradition of oral storytelling that connects us to the inspiration behind the words. Be sure to check the website, writersradio.ca, to subscribe to our free notifications list. It's also a way of letting the writers know you are there and appreciating their creative work.
Writers Radio broadcasts from Halfmoon Bay on the Sunshine Coast in Canada, traditional tribal land of the Sechelt Nation of the Coast Salish peoples. We express our gratitude for their wisdom teachings and land stewardship.